Oh, hi. This week, I'm going to show you from start to finish how I go about designing and then constructing the tote bags that I've been making for a bunch of events. These will eventually end up in my Etsy shop, but I have a couple of markets coming up, so I need inventory to bring to those. And y'all know how much I hate making Etsy listings. So if there is one that you see throughout the video that you were like, I need that, message me and I will figure something out, because y'all, more than anybody else out in the world, deserve to have first access to these things. So just putting it out there, not to like push you towards buying my shit. Oh, and quick aside before we jump into the project, speaking of markets, I did get to use my new setup that I showed y'all last month and it worked so well. Like, the market I did wasn't even particularly well attended, but something about my setup, it seemed to draw way more people in and keep them there. Like, they spent more time perusing, where I feel like my old table, it was just harder to shop at it. It was like a little too chaotic. And I do still think I need to like not put everything out on my table. I can have kind of like reserve inventory. So if one category of item is running low, then I can supplement it. I feel like I kind of overload it with the different categories and like try to put every single item out. And that is overwhelming to look at. Okay, let's nerd out about some fabric and making things, shall we? Let's all do a quick water check before we start working ourselves to the bone. Cool. So, as with all sewing projects, the best / most difficult part for me is picking out what fabric I'm going to use. I have a lot of really fun fabrics that I had to get or I was gifted, and I've kept them basically on a pedestal, like, oh, I couldn't possibly use these because they're too precious. Like, they're too nice to be made into anything, which is an unhinged way to think, and it's not doing anybody any good just continuing to sit in my fabric bins. So I'm trying genuinely to be better about it, because also I got that fabric because I was excited about it, or I was sent that fabric because someone else got excited about it and thought of me and sent it to me, and then I also got excited about it. So no more of this special reserve fabric, because I have so much that should be out in the world and made into the things. I can in fact be trusted with such materials, you know? Not everything I touch turns to shit. Still does sometimes, but generally speaking, material is in good hands most of the time. That being said, this also turns into me getting overwhelmed and wanting to make everything I think of, which is obviously impossible. So what I can do is narrow it down to make my favorite things out of the batch and go from there. And that also keeps up the like project momentum. If it's some of my favorite material to work with, every time I get to look at it when I like flip something inside out and I press stuff together, like as the whole project takes shape, I get re-excited every time I see it and like it reaching its final form and evolve through the process. It helps me finish the thing, which is also important. Basically, I have started letting myself follow the shiny thing, follow the trail of dopamine and whatever is giving me like a little hit of that and like, ooh, this would look nice. I'm just letting myself go with that. Also trusting my style instincts. This is something I didn't used to let myself do, where I would think, oh, I should make this however I think somebody else would think it should go together. I have had way more fun and way more success when I make stuff that I am excited about. And the only downside to this is that it's a lot harder to let these items go, because I basically go about making them as if I'm making them for myself, like something I would personally want. And that has translated to more people also getting excited about what I've made. It's like my personality is coming through a little bit more and my style sense and everything, because I'm letting it, and that seems to be going over well with the people. I feel like y'all can pick up on that stuff when I'm coming into something with different intentions. Not that I actively try to hide it or anything, but I feel like you can smell it on me when I'm not doing something because I want to do it and I feel like I should be doing something. So, tote bags, right? I've made big oversized ones before because, again, I felt like I should make those. So the ones that have been up in my Etsy shop are big. And don't get me wrong, oversized totes have their place. I definitely use them for specific things, like my gym bag is essentially an oversized tote. But my typical day-to-day, you know, going out to a store, going to a show with friends, even just my project bags, the tote size that I generally go for is roughly 15 inches tall and 15 inches wide, and has some like width at the side. So like boxed out corners at the bottom, or just an extra panel along the edges and the bottom to give a little extra girth, I guess is the word. The thing I don't love about some previous tote bags that I have made is when there's that seam across the bottom. I don't know why it bothers me. It shouldn't matter, but it does bother me. So the design I'm gonna make does not have a seam at the bottom, like the center bottom. How many times am I gonna say bottom in this like minute-long clip? So yeah, we're gonna just omit that and come up with some other solutions to construction. So the types of fabrics I need to pick out are the main outer fabric. Almost all of these are like quilting weight cotton. Some are actual fat quarters that I was gifted by my fairy god Cheryl, or you know, quarter yard lengths that I picked up at the fabric store, or just I have a ton of yardage of something and have trimmed it down to, you know, about 9 or 10 inches tall. I have 2 panels, so I have a front and the back of the bag, and I again have been going about 15 inches wide. Also, I misspoke before because I do prefer about 14 inches wide, but to get that with 2 seams either side, you're adding half an inch for both the left and the right, so that adds to a 15-inch wide cut piece because it's going to shrink down a little bit. I took so many notes and I still feel like I'm a little all over the place with this. I didn't get a lot of sleep because I overworked myself. I'm still in recovery mode a little bit, so apologies for the incoherent sleepiness that is setting in as the afternoon goes on. There is this laptop bag that I was given because like the zipper on it was broken, but it had really nice waxed canvas or like waterproof canvas panels on the front and back, and it's really pretty, like this navy cream tree tableau, I suppose. We're gonna give that some new life and repurpose it into a tote bag. Gonna add a lighter weight bottom to this one just because the side panels are going to be that heavier fabric and I like kind of balancing the two so it's not super bulky vinyl for all 3 sections for the bottom and the front and back panels. And then yeah, other than that one, and I do have some Sonic the Hedgehog fabric that looks like comic book panels, and something about that screams denim. And I have this really good heavyweight denim. I don't think I ended up cutting that out while I was filming because I started cutting out, I think I literally have like 30 tote bag panels cut out now, and I still have more set aside that I want to cut on my table, but I knew I needed to film at least one of these today. So that's why I just grabbed whatever was exciting me the most, and naturally exploding TARDIS fabric is what I went with because this is one of those fabrics. I have had it for like 7 years and I just keep not using it. In a shocking turn of events, that phone call derailed my brain and I have no idea what I was talking about. Diligent notes be damned. I literally have 22 pages filled in of notes about the stuff I worked on. Granted, it's a tiny notebook, but still. Focus. A still fun but slightly more stressful part of picking out fabric is matching the vinyl or whatever the more structural bottom is going to be to the rest of the bag. It's like when you're trying to match zipper colors or something, it can make or break the bag. So just follow my instincts, whatever felt right, you know? I have had all of this vinyl for so long, and a lot of it is either thrifted or remnants from Joann's, and I've had a lot of it for a long time, including this, which is marked May 2017. Haven't even taken it off of here, but a remnant from there of clear vinyl. I feel like I had ideas for what to do with this, but I don't know what that would have been. So if you have thoughts, maybe just a clear panel towards the top of a tote bag would be cool. It doesn't have to be totes. Any thoughts would be appreciated because I want to use it. And I know there's something to be made with it, but I can't think of what it is. Okay, so yes, once I picked out the vinyl pieces, I stuck with the 15-inch width. Although actually, these 2 specific ones that I paired with the exploding TARDIS fabric, they were little scrap pieces that my fairy god Cheryl sent me, so I was working with what I had. So these were a little bit narrower. That's the opposite of wide, is narrow, where most of the ones I cut were 6 inches by 15. These specific 2 are going to be a little on the shorter side. It's all within an inch or 2 of the other ones I'm making, so it'll be fine. There were some that I cut out that were too short to even do this with and just have it be a little bit of a smaller bag. So these cat fabric panels that I have, they're actually the very last scraps of some spoonflower fabric I was sent for a custom order that the lovely Amanda had me do. It feels like a couple of years ago at this point. These are the last little pieces, and I don't want them to go to waste. These kitties got to re-enter the world. So what I decided to do is have my bottom vinyl piece, then have the 2 cat panels, and then have another set of vinyl pieces at the top. So I just cut strips that were 15 inches wide and 3 inches tall. So we'll get a little bit more of a like color block situation going for this. And I think it's gonna look really nice, especially with the gray, picking up the gray of some of the kitties. I'm I'm really liking how that's going to come together. The only one we're constructing today is the TARDIS one. I will show you some others that I finished last week. Unfortunately, I did the thing leading up to the market where I scrambled and literally was attaching straps to the top of the bag as I was about to run out the door, to the point there were two I didn't even get to bring with me, and all they needed were the straps attached. I was a little bummed about it, but not the end of the world. There will be future markets. But I brought them to the event and then took so long to set up that the event had started and I was still like organizing some things. So I never actually got photos of the finished bags before they got sold, which was cool that a couple of the ones I finished making that I had no duplicates of, they were made with this like really pretty batik fabric. I'll let you guess who sent that fabric to me. She's called my fairy god Cheryl for a reason, y'all. Yeah, those sold like within 10 minutes of the market starting, so it was worth the lack of sleep. I really try not to do that anymore, where I did it all the time leading up to GraniteCon in previous years, and then all of 2019 when I was leading up to a market, I would just not sleep at all leading up to it and burn myself out super hard, and it was never worth it. Where at least the things I stayed up late and got up early to make, I think I was on like 3 or 4 hours sleep that day. Those were my biggest seller. So not to reward myself for bad behavior, but I am glad those sleep hours were not lost in vain. Oh, and then a little thing, when I'm cutting out panels of fabric that has like a really sharp crease fold, like these fat quarters that were pre-folded and have just like lived their whole life in half like this, it's really hard to press that out. And also if I'm cutting the piece in half, trying to line up the cut edge right in that crease, what I end up doing is I leave the fabric folded in half. I scoop my ruler as close to that folded edge as I can. I'm talking like a 16th or a 32nd of an inch. And then I just zip up that with my rotary cutter, and it hardly takes any fabric away while also giving a nice clean edge to both panels. All right, so this is when I decided we're doing an exploding TARDIS bag. We'll get the brown vinyl bottom and just work on that so I can show you how I go about this. I will be working on the rest of that batch this week because I'm on a wait list for another market this Saturday. I have confirmed another market on the 22nd, so 2 weeks away, just under 2 weeks away. And then I have another market 2 weeks after that. So like, I gotta build up the inventory, so it's good to like keep this fire under my ass, and just, you know, in the off chance I end up getting in this weekend, it would be good to have this little replenishment of my inventory, because like I said, the tote bags were my biggest seller. And when I think back on it, when I did GraniteCon last year, tote bags were my best seller. That was my biggest, like, I sold out of some of the designs the first night, and I really like how they're coming out. Anyway, I'm sorry I keep talking about the market so much. I'm obviously like very caught up in this. Oh, also, the reason I am extra throwing myself into this, I talked about this a little bit on a Patreon post that I made for this month. For some people, it's probably an overshare, but I share a lot of things with y'all, and this is one of my jobs. So I want to be transparent about things, where I have mentioned that I juggle a couple of part-time jobs where I work for someone else, in addition to me doing videos, me running an Etsy shop, me doing markets in person. Plus I do like pet sitting sometimes for people and little things like that. The brewery that I'm still employed by is one of those working for someone else part-time jobs. But the other one, I've been at a uniform store for 4.5 years now, and it's been what I thought was my most consistent income. Certain months it is my biggest chunk of income, but honestly, there are plenty of months that have happened where Patreon has always been the most consistent income I've had for years now. And like, I have no words for how much I appreciate that. I don't think y'all understand how big of an impact that has on my existence as a human being. I cannot believe how many of you there are. So thank you so much for supporting me, because I know this channel is tiny, but I feel like we have such a rad group here. The fact that y'all care about what I'm doing hard enough, it means the world. And it is because of that I don't have to completely freak the fuck out over the uniform store closing the store. They're still going to do some business, and I will have some sewing work to do, and I get to work from home, which is awesome. There's going to be a happy little mini dachshund once he finds out that I'm going to have that many more days working at home. Bert will be pleased, but obviously that is going to be a decrease in my income. So I am throwing myself even harder. And like, I mean, I made that big investment in my display stuff, and the timing of that could not have been better, because I made that investment into upgrading all my stuff and kind of like rebranding things. I still have more things to iron out as far as like signage and stuff like that, but I really like how my table is looking. I think the introduction of the teal into everything, it just pops more, and like I said, looks more like a proper shop stall, and I very, very, very much enjoy how this is coming together. But I put all that investment and work into it right before I found out about the uniform store news, so it feels a little bit like the universe is telling me to like go big or go home. Like, let's throw our whole ass into doing markets. And I will certainly be doing an Etsy launch once these markets are done. It's just a lot to juggle doing both right now. So once I am done markets for a number of weeks, I will update stuff. But yeah, that's the like life news and why I am going so hard. And I know I'm trying not to burn myself out. I do have to make hay while the sun shines though, because there's really like 2 windows of the year that markets happen. So there's like October to December in that window of time. And then this part of the year, like April through early June, I have a bunch booked. And outside of that, there's not like a ton. I do have GraniteCon in September. I got an exhibitor table this year and I'm terrified because it was the most I've ever dropped on a table, and it only got more expensive, and a vendor table is more expensive than the artist alley table. But I'm also guaranteed space for my garment rack, and that is going to make a huge difference for me, I think. I am really trying to make my own business work so that I don't have to go apply at like a retail job nearby and just have the soul sucked out of me. If I can supplement my income enough with my work, that's always been the goal. And I feel like this is a kind of make or break moment. So I'm trying to make it. We're not going to cry over tote bags. Okay. Ooh, I got chills. So pressing out the fabric. My God. If you have a lot of really stubborn wrinkles, and at least as far as like quilting cotton goes, if just pressing it with your iron isn't working, and even if you hit it with some steam, it's not quite working. Steam usually does a good job, but if you take a water bottle, like a spritzy one, not a jet stream one, and just mist it and go over it, and you'll get that nice sizzle sound. I don't know if I can actually play these clips with the audio because I was jamming out to some like early 2000s top 40 shit. I don't know if that's good or bad for the iron. I mean, the iron gets filled with water and emits steam on its own right. So why, if I am providing the water and it making steam that way, would it be a bad thing? It's probably fine. Okay, and if you haven't worked with vinyl before, it's basically plastic, especially on the right side of the fabric, so do not press it. Sometimes they have a backing that is ironable, like you can press it out. Vinyl doesn't tend to wrinkle, so if it's looking a little crumpled and you can't apply the iron to the back of the fabric itself. Again, some you can, some you can't. Keep an eye on the temperature of your iron because that can make all the difference. I have ruined an iron in this manner before, so please be careful. I did test the iron on like the very edge to see if it was gonna go over it. It started to stick just the littlest bit, so I didn't want to risk it and ruin this piece because it's the only piece of this vinyl that I have left and I don't want to waste it. And it works so well with this fabric because it picks up this like one bit of brown tone in the Exploding TARDIS fabric, and I just really like how it ends up looking. What I ended up doing is you can take like a press cloth, like just take a face cloth, a shitty thin towel, lay it over the surface. I'm using this Teflon sheet. It has a nice glide to it. It came in a 3-pack. It was not super expensive, and I have found a lot of success with this. And it doesn't hang on to the heat, so if you need to remove it quickly, you're not going to burn your little thingies. Then to lay out the fabric, I had the vinyl strip in the middle, and then I had my TARDIS fabric with the top of the design facing away from the vinyl piece, because the vinyl is going to be the very bottom. So you want to make sure that like nothing's upside down, both facing away because they're going to come up and form the top of the bag. And then I just stitched the bottom edge of the quilting cotton panels to the long edges of the vinyl, right sides together. Sew it with the vinyl panel facing down, so you're stitching along the back of it because it gets sticky. Not in like a gooey gummy kind of way, but just like a too much friction, kind of tacky, grippy, I think is the word I'm looking for. And there are Teflon feet that help with that kind of stuff, slide along, and walking feet help with that. As long as your sewing foot isn't making contact with the face of the vinyl panel, you should be okay. So the way I'm sewing this, the quilting cotton is on top and the vinyl is facing up, but the quilting cotton is between the foot and the vinyl. So I'm in the clear. Once those 3 were stitched together, you can kind of see what I'm going for here. I don't know if the design make sense right away if you're looking at it, but it's coming together, I promise. Now is one of my favorite parts, which is top stitching, mostly because I get to pick out a fun thread color, or at least like match it as well as I can. And instead of going with either like a yellow or a blue or a brown to match the vinyl, I went with a variegated thread, which I know it's pronounced variegated, but it is spelled like variegated. I don't know why. The spelling is not what I was expecting when hearing that word, but such is the English language. Anyway, that just means that it changes color as you go along the thread, so super fun. This is a little bit thicker than most of the thread I use, and it's hard for me to thread the needle with it because the layers of thread want to like untwist themselves. And by layers, I mean strands. Anyway, it took me until too recently to realize that there is a little contraption on my machine that is there to thread the needle for you. And I'm sure I was aware of it at some point and then just didn't use it for long enough that I forgot, because that's how my brain works. Also, I've had this machine for a long time. We've been through some things together. Super helpful when there's a thicker thread that just wants to separate and is being a real pain in the ass, where normally I don't have a problem threading the needle. Thankfully, I don't really only have one eye that works, so my depth perception isn't particularly good, but my eyesight is clear enough that like I can usually make it happen without too much effort, but having this here is super handy for frustrating threads like this. Also, this is something I didn't learn was even on my machine until I was watching a Cool Herba video years ago now. And sometimes I use this with regularity, and then again, I will forget that it exists for like a couple of years and then come back to it. But the back corner of my machine has a little thread cutter. It'll snip the threads for you. There's just like a little blade back there. So if you have not looked at that part of your machine, that's this bit. It's right here under this part. Discreet and unnoticeable to some. Not going to point any fingers. To do the top stitching, it's almost like a understitching, because I'm specifically stitching to keep the seam allowance going a certain direction, and also it'll give like a nice finish to this seam. But I am top stitching next to where the vinyl is, and this is also why I always stitch towards the quilting cotton, is so I don't have to stitch with the foot on the goddamn vinyl surface. So what I decided to do for this is, rather than mess with my walking foot or my Teflon foot, I just switched to my zipper foot. The foot itself didn't have to interact with the vinyl at all. It just went right along the edge there. So that's a little trick I decided on for this, and it worked very well. So you're welcome. All right, once that was done and we had our nice beautiful panel, it was time to measure out some fusible fleece. Now you can use any kind of interfacing, really. There's like sewable foam you can add to this. You can do quilting batting. That's what I've done on previous batches before. If you haven't used it before, it's basically like felt, but with glue on one side. I'm really digging how these are coming out with the fusible fleece / the batting that I've used, because I find quilting batting rolls at the thrift store with some frequency. And the last time I got them, I found 2 queen size quilting batting rolls that were $1 each. It doesn't have to be expensive. I also found my first ever batch of fusible fleece at the thrift store as well. I cut the panel a little bit smaller just to save some extra little bits of fusible fleece, and also just to reduce some bulk. All right, so once that was cut to size, I'm laying the fusible fleece glue side up on my ironing board. I almost forgot that word for a second. Then laying the wrong side of my bag panel down while the iron is heating up. Let us admire our nice crisp edges with this top stitching. It looks so good. I love how effective this is. It's just one quick little line of stitching, just a little guy doing a lot of work. All right, and then don't iron the vinyl. Just a little reminder to not do it. I have learned that when you have bulky interfacing like this, that the backing of it is thicker than the fabric you're attaching the interfacing to. So I don't know the proper technique for all of this, but I find great success ironing from the right side of the fashion fabric, because it's just a thinner barrier for the heat from the iron to get through. Then obviously it didn't attach to that vinyl panel in the middle. So what I'm going to do for this to not melt anything, because fusible fleece felt is essentially plastic, like this cheaper stuff. It's not like wool roving felting or anything. My iron does tend to stick a bit if I try to press from the fusible fleece side without any protection. Grab our Teflon sheet again, lay it over the center bit, so the back side of the vinyl, and just put as much pressure as I can on there to get through the Teflon sheet and the backing of the interfacing to attach it to the vinyl panel. Took a little elbow grease, but it looked really nice once I let off of it, so it came out well. And it's a small section, so it's not like I had to go super off the wall with this. All right, once that support layer has been properly adhered, it's time to fold this whole panel in half. I'm taking care to line up top stitched seam allowance edges of the vinyl to each other, doing that on the left and right side, and then to sew up these side seams. Again, I don't want a seam on the bottom center of my bag, so that's why we're doing it this way. Obviously, you can't avoid side seams with this construction method. So my tip here is to start sewing once you have that point pinned in place. Sew up from the bottom, because you can always even out any height discrepancies at the top of the bag, but you can't cut stuff up if you're going the opposite direction. So like if you're going top down and there's something that's like off kilter, it's going to be harder to adjust. So that's my approach for this. Oh good, my battery's dying, so I had to tuck you a little closer. All right, once that was stitched up and everything was looking nice and even, I'm very proud of how these lined up. It is time to box out the corners. To do this, I just flatten down that side seam and try to lay the actual seam allowance like flat. And then I measure in anywhere from like 1 inch to 1.5 inches. It depends on how deep the vinyl panel is. I wish I'd gone a little shallower for this one and just gone like right at 1 inch, because I think I did 1.5 or 1.25. Everything about this bag is already a little bit more compact anyway, so it's not the end of the world. I think it still looked really nice once I turned it out. Oh, and I like using this quilting ruler because it has these lines that are at a 45-degree angle. So when you line up this center line on a triangle, like this corner here, even if it's not going all the way into the point here, you can still use this as the center line, and then like as long as the left and right edge are evenly out from the center, I'm doing a bad job because mirrors are hard. That's how I get it to line up okay and look nice still, instead of being like super cockeyed. Then yeah, I just drew a line across and then stitched along it and did that for both sides. Trimmed it down afterwards too to reduce some bulk. And now listen, had I been more confident in my measurements at the start of all of this, I certainly could have cut the lining pieces out at the beginning. I don't know why this seems to work better for my brain, even though it's definitely more work and like probably less accurate, but also can make sure there's not as much waste. I don't know. Is it just me overcomplicating things and being really stubborn about it? Probably. So I just folded my outer shell in half, measured the height and the width of it, and then I cut out lining panels out of just some flannel. Normally when I'm cutting out 2 panels like this, because folding the bag down in half like I did and measuring it gave me half the size of the bag, and I need to double that to make the whole bag. But I want a seam in the bottom of the lining, so I'm going to do the lining in 2 pieces. Normally when I'm attaching 2 panels like that together, I add seam allowance to my measurements, but because this is the lining and we are adding that to the inside of the bag, it needs to be a little bit smaller. So omitting the seam allowance is actually going to help it look a little cleaner. I also make a point, as best I can, when I can, to cut the fabric so that any stretch that's happening is going across the bag and not up and down, so that lining up the lining and the outer shell is that much easier. You have like a little wiggle room here and there to make it fit real smooth. All right, now there are 2 ways to attach the lining to the outer shell. The way I am doing it for this, as I said, I want to leave a gap in the bottom of the lining. So I'm gonna sew up the sides of the lining panels, leave the top open obviously, and then sew partway across the bottom of it, but leave a gap in the middle so that I'll have a way to turn everything right side out after I attach it to the outer shell. Once the lining is together, I then folded it at the side seams to get the center front and center back. So I notched those. I did the same for the outer shell to notch those, just to have more points to line things up while I stitched them together. Oh, and this is where I almost forgot to box out the corners of the lining. I just did the same measurement as I did for the outer shell. 1.25 inches, I think I did, 1.5 inches. Whatever the number was, I matched it to the lining because I remembered when I was doing it, but it has gone out of my brain now. I'm going to attach these right sides together because the lining is intentionally smaller. I'm going to turn the outer shell inside out and then have the lining right side out so that it can tuck inside the outer shell. Then I'm going to line up the side seams and those 2 notches I made on both panels. I think I explained the other method for leaving a gap, so let's jump to that clip if I remembered to actually hit record for that part. Okay, so I mentioned that there are 2 ways to leave a gap in the bag to flip it out afterwards. So I have my gap in the bottom of the lining because I had 2 separate pieces there. You could also stitch most of the way around the top here if you have that closed up and leave a gap somewhere along here, because that's going to get top stitched after anyway. If this is your first time giving something like this a go, I would avoid dealing with this up here and just leave the gap in the bottom of the lining, just because it's going to be more hidden, because it is going to be obvious if something's off up here when you flip it out and go to top stitch. If there's like any discrepancies in the width of the fabric or anything and it doesn't fit right, there's going to be like weird puckers and stuff. So if you're feeling brave and bold, all the other ones I made this past week were done that way just because I think it looks nicer, but I figured this is a little easier to show. And if it's your first stab at it, this is a safer bet, leaving the gap down here. Okay, welcome back. So as I'm attaching these 2, this is where it's helpful to have your fabric cut with the stretch going across, because if you're needing to just zhuzh it into place a little bit, this is where that will come in handy, because if there's no give whatsoever, that's when you get puckers and things not fitting right and just not coming out super nice looking. We want to ease the layers together. Once that was attached all the way around, I did the birthing process of the bag, where I pulled everything out from the gap in the bottom of the lining. Then once everything was right side out, tucking the lining inside. Obviously, this doesn't look super nice and neat. Oh, and then sewing up the gap in the lining. This is where the complications can arise with leaving the gap along that top edge, is because you can see how it's like kind of warped from the strain of pulling that out. Yes, I could have made the gap bigger, but then that's more to sew and looks less good no matter where the gap is. So I try to make the gap as small as I can get away with, but it can distort the fabric along the opening. You can just hide that better with the bottom center bag. Hopefully that made sense. Anyway, obviously the top edge doesn't look super nice. It's like real droopy, just not clean looking. Here is my favorite stitch in the whole bag. And this is regardless if I have the gap in this top edge or if I have the gap in the bottom. It's obviously trickier to finagle when the gap is in the top, but it's still a very satisfying process. So I switched my thread back to the variegated one that I used for that bottom top stitching. So now that we're doing the top stitching, I just roll that seam over ever so slightly so that the lining is kind of tucked just a little bit towards the inside of the bag. I just don't want the lining visible from the outside. So I'm not folding it way over. There's just the littlest tuck happening. Pulling against my own hands as I'm running it through the machine and just keeping it super nice and flat. There's not a ton of pressure from my sewing foot on the fabric, so I'm not getting any weird like creasing happening, especially with the variegated thread. I just love how this came out. It's so, like, look at the difference, how this edge looks. It is so professional now. It makes me so happy. I love it so much. It's just such an effective stitch and it's so easy to do. So our bag is technically constructed. We just have to add some handles to it. Now you can add handles into the seam when you're attaching everything at the top there, like the lining and the outer fabric together. You can sandwich in handles there if you want to flip them out that way. I am using some nylon braided handles, which means you can get some fire going. I don't have a ton of lighter fluid left in this lighter, so I didn't want to use that the whole time to melt the edges, so I just lit a candle. Yes, this causes more smokiness. Most braiding, you can just like rub the smudging off of it, / just melt the end from one side and then have that underside with more charring on it, so the less burnt edge is facing out. So like, here's the underside, but this is the top. So if this is getting stitched down, never to be seen by the human eye again, who cares? It did its job. It's fine. Okay, to find the positioning, I just folded the bag in half, found the center points of the front and back, pinned there, and then I measured out 3 inches. You can go narrower or wider than that depending on the size of your bag. It's preference. I don't think it really has a huge impact on it. As long as there is some spacing, you'll be fine. But there's this like X in a box stitch that I see on strapping like this all the time, and I tried to emulate. But yeah, I don't know if there's like a specific order to do it. Or yes, I'm sure there's gotta be a way. You can do it without going back over your own lines, but I want to go back over my lines to reinforce this. So like, I just did it however I felt like doing it. I just did it the same way on all 4 points that I had to attach to the bag. And voila, it's done. Like I said, this is a little bit of like a shortier guy. I'm very excited at how this came out. I do generally have the straps be a little bit longer because I know I have like toothpick arms, so that's not going to work for everybody. But I'm so proud of how this came out. This is, I think, my most popular thing that I sell, and I'm glad I'm just like really honing in on evolving and improving the design. So yeah, I will have a bunch of these at the next couple markets. So yeah, if there are any that you're like, I want to grab that before it gets sold at a market, let me know and I will set up a custom Etsy listing or something like that for you. Like Venmo, PayPal, we can figure something out if you're like, I need it. Because I know I'm not really giving much opportunity to purchase it unless you are literally coming to my events in person, and I know that's not accessible to everybody. So just let me know and we will sort it out. Oh my goodness. I am hitting my wall, which is good because we're at the end of the project, and I'm very, very, very happy with how these tote bags are looking. And it's something I've been making a bunch of, and I know I did a tote bag video years ago now, and I still have some of that fabric. I will be making some with the like reinforcement that I've added in, because that's more of like a limp tote, which is also fine. That's the kind of stuff you can cram a pile of into a bigger tote bag to go to like the farmer's market or something. That fabric is so goddamn weird that I need to use more of it. The world needs to see it. And yeah, like I said, like I went on a very cheesy rant about more than ever. I'm so appreciative of everyone over on Patreon, because again, you're allowing me to do so much with my life, and the fact I don't have to go into complete panic mode with all this uniform store stuff is bigger than you'll ever know. So thank you so much to everyone over there. And if you've ever watched a video, if you've come to an event, if you've shared somewhere, if you have liked a video or subscribed to the channel, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate everybody. We have the best crew. I love our little bog troll community. Speaking of, if you want to come join the Discord, I do have that. I just don't have a public link because I don't have the energy to deal with trolls. So just message me somewhere and I will send you an invite if you want to come hang there. I will be taking next Friday away from posting a video. Again, really trying to like hit the gas pedal with markets, and I have definitely one next Saturday, if not also this Saturday. So it'll give me a little bit more of a window to get some more stuff built for that, and I just won't have to be a complete panicky mess about posting a video the day before that next event. Then I have a break. So the last Friday in April, that'll be the 30th. Can I do math? No, that is the 28th. Oh, that's going to be my dad's birthday. He would be 71 this year. Yeah, we'll be back on the 28th. And maybe that will actually influence what we end up doing that day. Probably something involving flannel, because the man was a lumberjack for a long time. So I will see you back here with another video in 2 Fridays on the 28th. If you are seeing this in time and you're in the New England area and want to come to mill number 5 in Lowell, Massachusetts, from 12 to 4 on Saturday the 22nd, I will be doing the Makers Market. It's one of the last markets of the season there, so I'm very excited to do it, and like hopefully that can help me get through the rest of the spring. So it would be rad to see you. Regardless, thank you so much for hanging out. And I just keep not using it. Oh, my phone is ringing because my brain is thinking about the TARDIS. I had a moment where I thought perhaps David Tennant was going to show up in my shop, but disappointment.